This is Stig of the Dump, Chapter 3, Part 2. We finished off with what a lot of firewood. That afternoon, Barney brought a hatchet, iron wedges, and the big sledgehammer down to the copse. Stig and he trimmed off the smaller branches, cut up the boughs into long logs, and managed after a long time and patient sawing to cut the main trunk into 3. Then they set work to split it up. This seemed to be a thing Stig understood. They started a splint with the axe, put in an iron wedge, drove it in with the hammer to make the split grow, then drove in the other wedges until there was a satisfying split, and the fibres of the timber parted from end to end. The sky was now getting grey and dark, and an icy wind had begun to blow, but they did not notice it. It warms you twice, you see, cutting wood. They trundled the logs to the edge of the pit and then sent them crashing to the bottom, not too near the den. Barney looked up at the pale sunset and saw how a kind of dust floated down from the sky. Sawdust? No. As it settled on the ground, it was white. It was fine snow. "Come on, Stig, let's get this fire going," said Barney, and they went round to the entrance of the pit, along to the bottom of the shelter, humped what they thought were enough logs and kindling inside, and then sat down, very tired, on the floor of the dark den. Now for a nice fire, thought Barney. Stig stirred himself. He picked up the gear lever of a motor car that was lying around in the den and poked carefully at the ashes of what had been the fire, but they were well and truly dead. Stig sighed. Then he reached for his bow, which was propped against the wall. It was a fine steel bow made out of a springy television aerial strung with a picture wire. He took the leg of the hardwood chair, which was sharpened to a point at one end. He fitted the point into the hole in the block of wood which he held with his toes, passed the bowstring round the leg of the chair, and held the top of the chair leg with a cracked egg cup, and began to draw the bow backwards and forwards, so that the string made the chair leg twirl. Barney was fascinated as Stig worked away, but though Stig seemed to warm enough at the job, Barney was getting cold. At last the point of this twirling began to make the wood smoke. Stig quickly fed it with a handful of grass and started blowing on it. Still fiddling away frantically with the bow, the grass glowed. Stig fiddled and blew. Everything in the cave was damp, and the fire died out with a wisp of smoke. The bowstring frayed and snapped. Stig, exhausted, said something in his strange language, threw the chair leg across the cave, and sat there, biting his nails. "Do you want a light, Stig?" asked Barney brightly, as he took a box of matches from his pocket and struck one. The little flame, amazingly, suddenly lit up the cave. The effect on Stig was wonderful. He uncurled himself, leapt to his feet in a bound, and stood staring at the lighted match with round eyes. And when the flame burnt down to Barney's fingers and he had to blow it out, Stig gave a sort of despairing moan. "It's all right, Stig. I've got loads more," Barney said. Then he struck another, and Stig jumped again, but this time crept up to stare at it close. "Come on, let's have some paper and twigs," said Barney. By the end of a third match, they found some, but they were not very dry, and it took another 3 or 4 to get a little fire going. Stig was lying on his stomach, blowing like bellows, now gently, now fiercely, adding a twig here and a splinter there from a wooden box, building a careful pile, feeding into the fire where it was needed. At last the flames licked upwards, and the smoke began to clear itself through the hole in the bath, and a warm glow began to light the walls of the cave. Stig put 2 logs on the back of the fire and began hissing and sizzling happily. Stig stretched himself out in the warmth like a cat, held his hand out to Barney as if asking for something, and Barney handed him the matchbox. Do you want me to show you how to strike a match, Stig? Here, push the little drawer. That's right, too far. Take out a match. Now you've got to shut the lid. Hold the match by the end, not the black end. Silly. Rub it on the side of the box. No, that side. There you go. After 1 or 2 tries, Stig managed to light the match, and he held the little flame and gazed at it until he burnt his fingers and had to drop it. Go on, strike another one, urged Barney. And he's got plenty. The box only costs about a penny, I think. But Stig wouldn't waste another. He took the box and hid it in his bed. It was clear, he thought, a match was a very precious thing indeed. Stig came back to the fire with his hands full of chestnuts. He put them in the ashes, and as they lay and waited until the chestnuts popped, then they hooked them out with the gear lever and blew on them and ate them. There were plenty of nuts in Stig's hoard, and Barney ate, can you believe it, 23. He felt wonderfully full and warm, and he lay there looking at the fire, at the shadows dancing on the walls of the cave. But Stig was squatting with a faraway look in his eyes and a piece of charred board in his hand, looking towards a blank wall of the cave. He seemed to be looking through it, not at it. He moved up the wall, his eyes fixed intently as though he was watching something interesting through a window. Then suddenly he attacked the white wall with his blackened stick. On the wall he made sweeping black lines, and there was the outline of a galloping horse. On the chalk he made sweeping black lines, more fierce scrapes of the stick, and there was a stag with antlers galloping. Soon there were little men running with spears and bows and arrows. Barney was hopping with excitement. Stig, you are a good drawer. I wish I could do pictures like that. Do some more. Oh, the men are killing the deer. There was a spear stuck in the shoulder of a galloping deer, so that it hurt to look at it. But Stig took no notice and didn't seem to be aware of Barney. Stig was not thinking about making the pictures. He was out there with the hunt, galloping with the animals, running with the hunters, and his hands, practised as they were at working with hard flint, tough bone, went on drawing the springy black lines on the white wall, as if he couldn't help it. Barney watched the hunting scene grow on the cave wall, and the last thing he thought was about the time. Of course, there was no clock in Stig's cave, not one that went anyway, and he went back to the fire to make it up, caught a glimpse of the darkness outside the entrance. It was night time, and he had to go back to the house through the dark, alone. Stig, I've got to go, he said, but Stig didn't hear. Barney looked at Stig's collections of weapons leaning up against the entrance. There was a spear, a long shaft of smooth hazelnut, a head of gleaming flint. It quivered when he picked it up as if it were alive. Stig, can I borrow one of your spears to see me home? Said Barney. Stig turned his head, saw Barney with the spear, and grinned. Barney took that as permission to have the spear, though Stig was still probably lost in the excitement of the hunt. Barney took a piece of wood from the fire, one end of which was flaming brightly, and with the spear in the other hand he crept out. It was pitch dark, very cold. An icy wind made the flame of his torch flicker, but he hoped it wouldn't go out. As he made his way along the bottom of the pit, he kept his spear ready just in case. Perhaps the bears and things were asleep for winter. Perhaps there weren't any bears after all. I mean, this is nowadays. It was difficult to feel sure about whether it was nowadays or not nowadays when it was dark at the bottom of this pit. There was something squatting in his path. Barney gripped his spear tightly and held it poised. It was all right. It was only a big can with Slap It On paint printed on, and he gave it a friendly kick as he passed. He climbed up into the copse and went through the trees. A white thing swept towards him wildly through the air. Thinking it was something scary, he jabbed at it wildly with his spear, but it was just an owl, ghosted off into the dark. Off with you, Mr. Owl. What do you mean by trying to frighten me? Said Barney. He was soon out of the copse, and by the time he reached the house, he was sorry to have come out in the dark. He put out his torch in the water butt, put the spear in the broom cudder, and changed his shoes. His grandma and sister were sitting at the table eating crumpets. Barney, where have you been? Were you up in your room all this time? No, Granny, I'm sorry I'm late, but I've been out with Stig. Oh, you've been out in the cold and dark all this time. Oh, Barney. I wasn't cold, really, Granny, but poor Stig was frozen to death and I had to warm him up, and his axe wasn't sharp enough to cut down trees, so we cut down a big tree and the saw got stuck, so I had to climb up and pull it down, and then we got stuck and pushed it down into the pit. Stig tried to light the fire with a chair leg and an egg cup and the television aerial, but I showed him how to strike matches, and then we ate chestnuts. And Lou, Stig's jolly good at drawing horses and things, and he was still drawing them when I left with a piece of blackboard on a chalk. Lou giggled. Granny, Barney said Stig was drawing with a blackboard on the chalk. He meant a chalk on the blackboard. Barney decided to join in the laughter. They didn't ask him any more questions after that, but Barney felt happy because he'd helped Stig with his firewood, and he felt happier than he did about helping Stig with his firewood than he did about any of the presents he'd got at Christmas. That's the end of chapter 3.